Welcome back to another edition of Ask That. My name is Clark Sell. You've seen me 55 times by now, and if you haven't, go back and watch the other 54. Today we're going to talk a little bit about work-life balance, and with me I've got a good buddy of mine, Jason Lengstorf. Jason, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you back. You are, as the people don't know yet, you are the OG, the original gangster of this podcast. You were show number 1 that has not yet been released.
It was dark launched. It was just really dark.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. We have spent many hours editing that thing, only to still have not released it because I haven't put a bumper on the thing. But with that being said, welcome back. And why don't we start with, who are you?
I am some bald dude on the internet. I come from kind of a weird background. I worked as the head of my own agency for quite a while. Did a little bit of contract work for some folks. Moved over to IBM for about a year and a half, and I'm currently working on Gatsby, the performance and productivity harness for React.
I've never heard it referred to that way.
We're working on messaging because we keep saying static site generator, and people go, "Oh, static, that means it can't do anything, right?" And I'm like, no. You are mistaken. It hydrates a React app. It's actually like pre-compiled progressive web apps. We're trying to figure out how to say it in a way that makes sense to people.
Yeah. We'll save that for another show because I'm a big fan of Gatsby and React and that whole stack, and it's cool. But today we're going to talk about how your beard almost fell off.
Oh, that story, yeah.
Or we're just going to talk about work-life balance because it is an issue, and as we've been, 11:30, so we've now spent the last 30 minutes not recording, talking about all this shit going on between you and me, and you just moved to Portland and you made a transfer from Big Co to Other Co, and work-life balance is an issue. I certainly work in extremes. Anybody who's known me knows that I've done 72-hour shifts. I've done, crazy stuff. We're in the last kind of great epic stride of, get ready for that conference, and it's, a nonstop 7 days a week and all that. So I ask you, is work-life balance a factor?
I have this theory that I've been kicking around for a little while, and I've never talked about it publicly, so let's see how it goes. I had this kind of pivotal experience in my past. When I was working at an agency, I was 7 days a week all year. It was like wake up on email, go to bed on email, fall asleep on my keyboard kind of stuff.
Yep.
And it was 70, 90-hour weeks, and it was really, really just a constant grind to the point where like my friends just assumed I wouldn't show up to things. And if I went to dinner with somebody, they would always invite an extra person for when I inevitably stood up and took a phone call and left the meal. So there were lots of really negative social effects. And then after a particularly grueling project, I did a Black Friday project for a Fortune 500, tons of pressure, and the project went way over schedule and was, I had to get 2 weeks of work done in about 4 days. And so I decided, rather than lose the contract or miss the deadline, I just power through it. So I did like 4 straight days of not sleeping, not eating crap.
Yep.
And a couple months later, this all kind of manifested with my beard falling out of my head. So I don't, doctors won't confirm that it's stress induced, but I swear to God, it's stress induced. I gave myself alopecia, basically. And alopecia is kind of a mysterious disease because they don't know what causes it. It's like hormonal imbalance. It's all these things. But one of the leading theories is that it can be brought on by stress. And in my case, I would be willing to say with like 99% certainty that that's what happened because I was super stressed. My beard fell out. I made a decision to just cut back on everything, drop my working hours to like a maximum of 40 hours a week on a computer, like including my Netflix and email and all that. And within a couple of years, my beard grew back. And so it was very much like when I stopped living in this super hardcore way, my body rebounded and I came back and like started feeling healthy again, lost a bunch of weight, my beard grew back. I felt in general, like a better human being. And of course, this like cascaded everywhere. Like my social life improved.
Sure.
I had the ability to actually get through a meal. I got better at turning my notifications and stuff off. But what I've noticed is I'd still like to work a lot. So I enjoy putting in a lot of time. And if I don't pay attention, just because I'm enjoying what I'm doing, I'll work 70 hours a week.
Yep.
So I have a theory, because as I've looked at myself over the course of time and kind of looked at my productivity over time, I've noticed that it's not consistent. I have a tendency to go really hard on something when I'm interested in it. And then I kind of have these periods of accomplishing nothing. And I started looking at it and I was like, oh, well, does that just mean that I should like chill out and try to be like steadily productive all the time? Yeah. But I don't actually think that's how humans work. And so this is where my theory comes in, that I'm not really sure if it's true or not. It's just anecdotal based on my own experience and that of a few people around me. But I think that we have a rhythm with the way that we work. And I think this is true of every project and of every, of every working style to a certain degree, especially knowledge work. Well, sorry, speaking exclusively about knowledge work, because I think that it's a different beast. So in knowledge work, when you come into a problem, you're going to go through 4 phases, and I've come up with a very helpful anagram called LEAD, right? So the first phase, you're going to learn. You're going to look at, you have a problem, you got to look at the problem statement, go through the process of gathering as much information as you can to see, what could be done about this problem. Once you get through that phase, you're going to evaluate, which is where you actually look at all the information and decide. You're going to figure out, okay, this is the solution we're going to implement. Then you act, which is where you just put your head down, stop learning, and start driving through that problem. And at the end of that, you have to decompress. So basically what I'm seeing is this kind of like wave form. So the learn phase is kind of low key. You're not really acting, you're just kind of consuming, right? You're reading a lot of blogs, you're building little proofs of concept, you're kind of getting your head around the problem. And then the act phase is super small. It's typically like a couple meetings or just like making sure what's going on. The evaluate phase is really small. When you decide to act though, that's when like the gas that's when you light the fires and you go really hard. And, on a small project, that might be a weekend. On a longer project, it might be a couple weeks. And if you make poor decisions in your planning, it might be a couple months. And so,
or you take on too much.
Well, yeah, right, exactly, right. And so once you get through that act phase, whether you want to or not, you're going to end up decompressing. And if you decide that you're going to act for months or years on end, eventually that decompress phase is so brutal that we would call it burnout. It's where you just can't even fathom the idea of continuing to work. And so I think what I'm learning is that I shouldn't be striving to like work exactly 8 hours, sleep exactly 8 hours, and relax exactly 8 hours. I don't think that's how humans work. And I think that trying to enforce that sort of thing would be, it's a level of hubris, that's just not how biological systems work. It's fuzzy. So instead, I try to realize like what's the actual scope of what I'm trying to accomplish, and like put real bounds around it. So, for example, right now, one of the projects that I'm building is a store for selling Gatsby swag. And this has kind of unlimited potential. There's so many things we want to do with it. Like I have all these ideas about ways we could bring in like social stuff and like different contributor level awards and like all these third party systems. But each of them could be, yeah, right. But so all of them are like different phases. Yeah. So what I had to do was like decide, okay, what can I reasonably accomplish in like 2 or 3 weeks? And then, I got to give credit to Marissa Morby. We contracted her to kind of plan this. She helped scope this down immensely, because if it was me, I would have been like, let's do it all.
I got this 2 days. How's that 2 days? 2 months later.
And so we worked together. We scoped it down. We figured out what like a reasonable first push is going to be. And for the last week and a half, I've been putting in probably 10 hours a day on it because I'm having a blast. But the end is in sight. We're gonna wrap this up probably within 3 or 4 days. And once that's done, I've got friends coming in town for 10 days. And more than likely, I'm going to clock less than 4 hours a day while they're here.
Sure.
and you know, I'm just planning it in. Like I'm acting now. I'm going to decompress when my friends are here, and when they go home, I'm going to be looking at the next phase of the project, and we just kick it all off again. We start the next cycle. And I think that. So, anyways, that's my theory. I could talk about this for like 4 hours, but does that seem like it mirrors your experience?
It does actually, and it's taking a long time to recognize one's inner self and how one works. I feel like I'm only ever really productive when anarchy exists. Like if you give me one task, like great, I'll take 8 hours to do it. You give me 800 tasks, and I'll take the same 8 hours, if you will, right? And it's how I've ended up running a conference, running our own company, helping out here. Like that anarchy is just like I just don't function well without it. And it's only been like the last 6 months, a year, that I've realized I've been doing that since I was 15. Like, I'm 42. When I was 15 years old, I had 2 jobs. When I was 16 years old, I had 3. I was working in a Walgreens drugstore at night. I was working in an automotive shop during the day. And so I would get up, I would go to the shop, I would grind from 7 to 3. I'd go work from 3 to 11 at a Walgreens, and then I'd work from 11 to 3 in the morning in my garage, jamming out on side cars and whatnot that I was making cash money. And it wasn't until like 6 months ago I was like, I've been doing this shit since I was 15. Like, what are you doing? And so I get into these, now I've got 2 kids and, wife and a house that needs work and lawn that needs to be mowed, and the risk profile has gotten bigger, right? So now we're not just talking about like, throwing some tin on some windows. We're talking about like, a $500,000 conference that has to be organized and run.
Right.
And so now I think about scale and, to your point, time. Like, what are these things and how does one take breaks? And ever since we spun off from kind of Big Co and we've been on our own, I haven't had a vacation. Like, all right, maybe I take a thing here or there, but when I was at Big Co, like, I took my 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and so the decompress piece, as you talk, was somewhat built into when could you do it. Whereas now, like, I would say, I think work-life balance tends to imply like you had this amount of time during the day, and then you got family, you got dinner with your family, which like historically. But it's not that. Like, I don't think we work in that world anymore. Like you said, this is a time where I'm going to need to do this for maybe 70 hours a week, and then I need to take 2 weeks off, and that's okay. That 2 weeks doesn't have to revolve around a holiday. Maybe you need a 3-day weekend because you got shit to do at home. Like, life doesn't map that way anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's something that we have to keep in mind is like forgiving ourselves for needing time down, because it's, if you think about it in terms of anything, like you can't run an engine at the red line endlessly. Like you got to cool it down. You got to do maintenance. It's the same with your mental state. It's the same with your body. Like we can't run at 100% indefinitely. And unfortunately we have a culture where we encourage this idea of running at the red line, where we want peak efficiency. And like peak efficiency has been twisted by management consultants and whatever to be your team operates at 100%, but that's not what peak efficiency is.
Right.
Like, well, it's peak efficiency in the short term, but that's from the standpoint of a company that can afford to work somebody into the ground and then hire somebody else to go back to working into the ground. Yeah. And that's not how we work, especially in smaller companies. It costs about twice as much to hire somebody new as it does to keep somebody who's already working for you. And when you think about numbers like that, it would be incredibly stupid of a company salary on that person. And so, from the standpoint of like longevity, what we should be looking for is like, what's the percentage we can work at on average that will keep us there forever? And maybe that percentage is 85%, maybe it's 65%. I don't know. I'm not actually sure what people's output should be, but I do know that we need to break that expectation that like there's no such thing as downtime, or that any downtime is a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
You know, I think one of the things that I've started doing that I really like is I moved into Portland, and Portland's walking distance from, you know, when you live in Portland proper, you're pretty much walking distance from everything. So I take a 30-minute walk to go get lunch every day, which means that I'm walking for an hour.
Yeah.
And that time, like, I can't like code while I'm walking. It's a built-in disconnect from the work.
So interesting that you said that, because that built-in disconnect is something that I've had now for the past 5 years. So I actually got involved with the soccer club, kids soccer club, and I started coaching. And the thing about coaching was it was 2 hours a day where I had to, like, the phone stayed in the truck, the cleats got laced on, I was on a field, I was moving. There was no time to think about the work things, like that break that happened. And I needed that. Like, I really, really needed that. And then I stopped coaching. And then all of this other stuff became, you know, the new company and all that, and, you know, just panic attacks and, like, the shit is real. Like, if people, you know, when you're trying to feed your family and get your own contracts and keep this stuff going and you're grinding away, like, the shit gets real.
Yeah.
So I told my wife, I think it was 2 months ago, I want to run a half marathon. Now, I'm not a runner, but again, working in extremes, it was a forced disconnect. And so not only is running, like, I don't enjoy it, it's hard as hell. It's a mental, like, slap you in the face with a shovel. But guess what? If you're going to set out to go run 4 miles and you, like, leave the house and the only thing you have on you is your watch, a podcast, and some headphones, like, that's it. Like, there's, like, the walking, like, you're disconnected. Like, I don't take my phone. There's no alerts coming through. I only return home when I finish the task, and the task happens to be absolutely nothing to do with anything on our square property on Earth.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's also kind of an interesting way to, like, that forced disconnect. It's, we tend to undervalue it as, like, not being part of a productive lifestyle. We think, like, oh, well, if I go walk an hour, that's an hour that I'm not producing. But there's, like, a whole other side to being productive, which is the kind of abstract reasoning and problem solving. And when you're not able to actively focus on a task, it moves into your subconscious, and that's when you start coming up with, like, that's when you get the thing over here and the thing over here that you know are, like, tangentially related, and your subconscious just goes, oh, they fit like this. Right. And then you have your eureka moment, and you go, oh my God, I just solved this big problem.
Right. These are the moments in the shower. These are the moments mowing lawn. Like, if you don't foster those things, you're never going to get them.
Right. A friend of mine, a guy named Saul Orwell, who's out of Toronto, he builds a walk-in every day, and he does it as, like, a built-in way to, it kind of takes the place of meditation for him. He does that walk to let his brain disengage so that he can solve problems in the background and come up with new ideas. And so he was one of the inspirations for me taking that on, and starting to walk everywhere. Is it gives me a chance to let something roll around in the back of my head where I'm, you know, working on teaching myself to whistle because I'm terrible at it. But in the back of my head, I'm, like, plugging together these concepts that I kind of know but haven't really solidified yet. Yep. And I found that since I started walking, I'm having less, like, stress dreams about the problems I'm trying to solve. Because my subconscious is engaging during the day instead of me forcing it to happen at night. Like, I don't know. So the best visualization I have of this is, like, for people who don't code, if you've ever played a game like Tetris or Dots or one of those phone games where it's, like, pattern matching, if you play that game too much where you start dreaming about it, that's your subconscious trying to, like, figure out how to match those patterns. So this is like code all the time. And so if I'm working on a problem and I'm not disengaging from it, I have nightmares where I'm trying to code. Yep. It's the worst.
I've literally woken up in the middle of the night and grabbed a piece of paper and started writing down the solution half asleep, only to find it in the morning and go, yeah, that was it. That could have
exactly.
That was cool.
Yeah, right. And so since I've started doing the walk, this forced disconnect, like, those are happening now during my waking hours instead of stressing me out while I sleep, which is amazing. Yeah. But you brought up something earlier that I don't know if this is a tangent that you want to go on, but I was interested in it because you were talking about you're the sole proprietor of your company, mm-hmm. and you've been like trying to find a way to get vacations, mm-hmm. right? And so I just gave this talk at a conference called the Lead Developer, which is one of my favorite conferences I've ever been to. It's a really interesting event that's targeted toward only senior level people, which means that the level of content is like, some of it is just like mind meltingly complex, you know, but a lot of it was built around culture. Yeah. And the culture stuff was so fascinating to me. So one of the talks that I gave was on processes. And I feel like a lot of times I talk about processes, people kind of roll their eyes like, oh, process is the worst. It's like you're making me jump through all these hoops to just do a thing. And I heard a really interesting quote, and I wish I could remember her name, but she works at Automatic. She said that engineers don't actually hate process. When they like a process, they just call it culture. And then you know, Marissa Morby, right? It is.
It's totally the case.
I was talking about this with Marissa, and she was telling me that, you know, there's no such thing as not having a process. Like every company yep. has processes. Sometimes the process is run around in circles, panic, and then like wait until the deadline, shit your pants, and do something. And that is not a great process, but it is the process.
Still a process.
And so
or agile.
Our apologies to all the Scrum Masters on the audience.
Sort of.
What I thought was really interesting about that is like, when I ran my agency, one of the biggest mistakes I made was that I would design these processes, and these processes were designed for they were designed to be logically correct. And I was making these big mistakes where I wasn't thinking about how they would be adopted by other people. And so I wasn't designing a process to be adopted. I was designing a process to be correct. And then I wouldn't follow my own process because I hadn't designed it to be adopted. And then I'd get mad at my team when they didn't follow it. And then I would just throw my hands up and go, oh, well, you idiots just don't know how to do this job.
Sure, totally.
Let me just do it. And that I think contributed in a big way to the fact that I never took breaks. And so when I had my big kind of like falling out where I decided I was going to cut my hours in half and stuff, one of the things that I did was I looked at the work that actually needed to be done, not the logically correct stuff. And I put together the first and only process that I ever wrote at that agency that was good. And it was kind of designed around like how we're getting project out the door, how we're defining deliverables. And we put together a bunch of plans. And then I went to Alaska for 10 days. And while I was in Alaska for 10 days, I fully expected my company to implode. I'd kind of come to peace with that. And there was this like dark part of me that was hoping for it because I was like, oh, well, then it would be off my plate and I won't have to worry about it anymore.
Sure.
I was like making plans to go work as a bar back because I wanted a job that I didn't have to think about, right? I wanted a job where I went in and I put in my 8 hours, and when I left, that was it. The store's closed.
I've often thought about being a plumber. Glue pipes together.
But so when I put this process together, what I was basically thinking is like, okay, so I'm gonna say this is the minimum amount of work that we need to get done while I'm gone, and I'm gonna like give you some guidelines, and otherwise you're on your own, and I trust you. And then I actually trusted them, and I forced myself to trust them by leaving my phone in Portland and going up to Alaska. And while I was in Alaska, there was no internet. I didn't have my computer. I did bring my phone, but there was no service out there, so it was. Okay, well, it's basically useless.
Yep.
And when I came back,
clock.
It was an excellent clock, and like I jotted all of the tweets that I wanted to be sending into a notepad document on my phone, because this is the kind of sad human being that I am. But when I came back, my company had run better without me than it ever ran when I was there, because I realized that I was like a helicopter, just going around and making everybody else's life hard. And from there, that was when the light started to come on about process. And ever since then, in every project that I work on, I'm basically looking for the best possible way for me to never think about it. And then once I get it to the point where I think it doesn't need to be thought about by me, I hand it to somebody, and then I pretty much refuse to talk to them. Not like in a like you can't talk to me way. But if they email me and say, I can't figure this out, I won't respond for 24 hours because I know that they'll figure it out. Like if it's something that's obviously wrong, like they're like, hey, you're missing a step in this doc, like I'm going to respond right away and fix it. But if, hey, we're looking at this thing and would you do it like this? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to wait that out. And then they respond later. They go, well, we figured it out. And I'm like, perfect. I knew you would.
I call that little moment there that like you're treating me like Google. Like if your answer is to always ask me how to do a thing that you probably could find yourself, chances are I'm not going to answer it.
Yeah, but that's a hard one for me because one of my favorite things to do is help people. Yep. And as you can tell, I love to talk. So if you ask me a question and create an opening, not only am I going to help you answer your question, I'm going to get a whiteboard out and explain all the theory behind it.
Yeah. So, I'm going to give you 150% because that's how I grade things.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
And so, it's just something that's I've been thinking about a lot, and it's especially it's important to me right now when we're at Gatsby because Gatsby is currently a company with 9 employees, and each of us is coming from a really different background. So, I come from both agency ownership and like big company. We're working with guy named Kurt Kemple who comes from Major League Soccer. He was a senior engineer there. We've got Shannon, who is like a corporate training specialist, a couple people from startups, a couple people who've been freelancers their whole careers. And like this, it's a really fascinating blend of people. And so one of the problems that we're trying to solve right now is like, how do we get all of these different experiences and all of these different levels of expertise put together in a way that allows each of us to operate, but that doesn't make any of us a silo, a bottleneck, or
totally.
If somebody quits, are we done?
Right. Yep.
And so one of the concepts that I've been playing around with is typically called the bus factor, but I've been trying to reframe it. Are you familiar with the bus factor?
I'm not.
So the bus factor is the idea that like how many people on your team can get hit by a bus before.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I've been trying to reframe that as vacation tolerance. So like, what's your team's vacation tolerance? And your vacation tolerance should be like 3 or 4. On a team of 10, like your vacation tolerance should be almost 50%. Where the whole team, like most of the team, can go on vacation, and everybody else who's still working can still get stuff done.
Yep.
And so we've been trying to think about that.
So you just reminded me of just a quick story, which will just hit home. Like because you got a shop of 9, when life before this, we had a shop of 6 or 7, right? Mm-hmm. And that tolerance, like I can remember we took the entire crew out to dinner, and I was like, well, shit. There's support. There's engineering. Like, if something happens, like, did somebody bring it? Like, do we have an internet connection? Because I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what we're trying to think through. It's like, how do we make it so that, if, like for right now, Sam Bhagwat is kind of running operations for the company. If we need to like clear a purchase and Sam's on vacation, like we just wait till Sam gets back. And, and that's something that we know that, but, and it's not really a big deal, but it's something that will become a big deal.
Right.
So we're trying to get ahead of it now. Yeah. How do we make this work where like we've got processes that are so good that all of our engineers call it culture. We've got a culture of sharing. We've got a culture of redundancy, and trying to make that work, which is a really interesting problem to solve. And we're definitely not there, but we're working on it.
And it's funny because I feel like you're almost forced in small company to have to take that stuff on head first. Like you don't really have much of a choice because you live and die by it. And then a little bigger than small, right? You have the resources to be able to kind of implement that pretty effectively. And then you get into a big company, and it turns to be the exact opposite of where you have all the resources and things, and yet it somehow becomes like the grind of like, oh my God, the world's dying because you left. And you're like, there's 130,000 people here. Like, how come I can't leave for 2 weeks? Like, when did that become so important?
I think it's a cultural thing that I think a lot of the reason that early stage startups die is because they think they're doing something reproducible, but really it's built around one person.
Oh, totally.
Or like a small group of people. And as those people, like that type of culture, when you bring it up to a big company, so for example, when I was at IBM, we had some issues where there were teams that were, they were teams of rock stars. And so each of those people they owned a disproportionately large amount of the code base. And they were kind of protective of it. Like they wanted help, but they didn't want anybody to touch their stuff. And
the fact that that's even the title, right, already implies that there's a problem.
Well, that's a title that I give them, and it's kind of I use it as a derogatory thing. Like if you're a rock star in your company, you're screwing up. But
that's right.
From my standpoint, it just seemed like, it was a team. They wanted to get something done. They produced a result. They got rewarded for producing that result. So they were like, oh, well, that's what we should do every time. And then they learn, organization, you learn.
Yep.
Yeah. If we just do this thing, we get bonuses and high fives. And they're forgetting that the thing they're not getting is vacation.
That's right.
Or, the flexibility. So now, this team, these folks, these teams that I was talking about in IBM, they get paged constantly.
Yep.
I felt terrible. I went to a conference with one of these people who was a rock star. The pager went off every 2 hours, minimum. And every morning we'd be like, hey, do you want to meet up in the lobby and walk over to this event? They're like, I'm going to be a little bit late. I got paged from China. I'm fixing a problem. And then we'd be like, hey, do you want to come out and get a drink? I can't. I got paged during the last event. I got to go home and solve this thing. And I was like, man, you are on vacation right now. You're at a conference. You're supposed to be learning something.
Yeah, say no.
But they can't, because the way that they built themselves into this situation is that not only are they the only ones who understand how it works, in a lot of cases, they're legitimately the only person who has access. And so it's this very dangerous cycle where, if you don't acknowledge it early, and a lot of times you don't think it's a problem. It's like, oh, well, there's only 3 of us. If we have a problem, you can just call me. And then it's 10, and he's like, well, yeah, you can still just call me. And then it's 20, and suddenly it's becoming a little bit of an issue. But by then the culture's already sunk in.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's really, really hard to do things like, hey, I know that you can just tell me this, but can you write it down in a doc so that later I can do it on my own? Or if we hire somebody new, nobody has to explain it. We can just give them the doc.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you brought up the doc. I mean, I have gotten a lot better recently of I don't want to say using the tools for their purpose, but all right, instead of me, writing all the stuff down in my notebook or whatever, right? I've started okay, well, we're just going to log this in GitHub issues. I already got the source space. I've already got the thing. I know it's just me. I don't really give a shit. I'm just going to start throwing these issues down, and then I can stack them myself and deal with it. And the thing that it's starting to do for me is clear out the psychic weight of having to kind of remember one's place. And maybe it's because I'm involved in kind of a lot, but I spend every morning and I write down a just kind of a stacked list of this is how today feels. This is a 1 thing I want to get done, a 2 thing, a 3 thing, and kind of they're just references back to kind of where things are stored, and it's certainly helped mentally, but it's also I don't know.
Yeah, we've been trying to do the same thing, and to kind of externalize all of our docs into a central location. So I've been trying to turn GitHub into a single source of truth. And single source of truth is kind of one of those buzzwordy things, right? Where the ultimate goal is to find a way where anybody in the company can say, I have a question, and you go, the truth is here. As opposed to, somebody wrote half that doc, and then there's this half-finished project over here. Yeah. But so we've been attempting to make GitHub our single source of truth. So we've stolen some good ideas. React has an RFC process where if you want to change the way something works in React, you have to write a doc justifying it, have a discussion, and then if that gets accepted, they merge it into the repo. And so you get the history of the discussion and why they landed on that. So we've adopted that for our internal process, which has been super cool. It's been a very effective way of doing it. Because when somebody goes, well, I don't agree with that, you go, okay, well, go read the rationale. And if you still don't agree, open an amendment to that RFC, and then we'll discuss it again.
Yeah, I like that.
but we've also been doing it with our issues. So every time that I have an idea, if I think of something, I throw it into our issue queue, and then we use Zen Hub on top of it so that we can organize our issues into, we don't actually do Kanban, but we use the Kanban board view because it lets us prioritize issues, and it also lets us see kind of what everybody's working on. And by using,
what was it called?
It's called Zen Hub.
We used to use Waffle. Which
Waffle
is about the same thing.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. What I like about Zen Hub is it's just a browser extension that sits on top of GitHub and just modifies the GitHub interface. Just adds some extra functionality, which I really love. And so what it does for us is it gives us the ability to do, like, using agile terminology because they're designed to be agile. We don't really do agile, but we use the concept of epics. So any project that we're working on, like a big long-term project, gets put together in an epic, and then projects get kind of assigned to sub-epics within that. And so we can see the issues that are bundled up into that sub-epic. And it kind of puts everything into one big perspective view. And by doing this as a way of organizing our work, we all have our to-do list in public, but because we've got them organized into these epics and sub-epics, we can filter so that your noise isn't interfering with it. And so it's been a really effective way of kind of seeing that. And we've all gotten into the habits of just like taking notes on our own stuff in issues. So now I can track my own thought process, which if I go back through my notebook into projects past, I can find places where I like wrote out ideas or like sketched something, crossed that out, wrote out the way that I want to do it.
Sure. But you're holding on to that memory pointer. Like, you're holding on to that pointer, and that's the thing that I like. I've had buffer overflow. Like, I can't do that anymore. I can't keep the shit straight. Yeah,
exactly. And so what we've started doing is we've been trying to think like, okay, just externalize your thought process into the issues. And yes, probably no one will ever look at it again. And yes, probably it's like not something that's going to be particularly valuable in the long term. But what it gives us is that one time out of 100 that we need to know the thought process for something, we just go back and find it. We can trace it from beginning to end. And it also gives us the ability to, like, we only hire people at Gatsby who are extremely strong in written communication. That's partially because we're an open source company, which means that the vast majority of our interaction with customers and contributors is through GitHub issues. And partially because like we're fully remote. We all live in different parts of the world. And so we have to be able to
asynchronous communication. Exactly.
And we're working to the point where we want to get to the point where we're only ever speaking to each other because we want to talk to each other. We're trying to get to the place where async is possible for everything except more or less team building and like idea stuff. If we want to workshop an idea, that's always going to be better in person. But
I always call that like the high fidelity conversation, right? The time that you and I are speaking, even just like now, right? These are things that should only. That sounds bad. It's an opportunity where we can express ourselves in a much deeper way than having to like be formally thought out about things. So the conversation can meander, it can do things, but it needs to be kind of super, super high fidelity. Otherwise, we could just either write it or some other form of.
Yeah, well, and like the tangent, we started talking about work-life balance, and we wandered on the process, and I think had that happened in a chat or in a message thread, it would have just felt like the conversation had diverted.
Sure, absolutely.
Because we'd probably be typing past each other, right? Which is what I see in chat a lot, is like people are basically finishing thoughts, but they're like intermixed with other people finishing thoughts.
Yeah. And so the latency.
Exactly, right? And so, I think there are always going to be places for in-person conversation or at least synchronous conversation. But in a lot of cases, it's just not necessary. And you can make it unnecessary by being good about building a culture of living in public. Transparency is huge.
Yep.
And if you can build that as like, look, write your bad ideas down. Like, I don't care if you write down a bad idea. I care that you're writing down your thought process. Yeah. And like, I will give you feedback if I think the idea is bad when you get it to the point where it's ready for feedback. But, in the meantime, like, sure, write down or like take a photo of your crappy drawing and post it in an issue and say, I want to make this better. And then we know where it started and where it ended up. And that makes for case studies. It makes for blog posts. It makes for internal communication. It makes for like all of these things that we can do with it later that just make the company better.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's
I've always had a rule with tools. You know, I've been a mechanic and I like to do things with my hand. I've always had if you want to call it the golden rule, if you will. When it comes to a tool, if you think you're going to use it 2 or 3 times, you buy it. Now, if you think you're going to use it 10 times, then you buy the better one. So there's kind of a level of once, maybe you rent it 2, 3 times. Can you get away with a cheap one? If you're going to use, if it's a tool in your box that you're going to carry, buy the best damn one you can do it. And I think of a lot of things in software like that as well. Like there's times where we can write a really crappy POC. It got the job done. Maybe we're not using the YRs and the best thing ever. But then again, if it's something that we're going to use all the time, then let's get a build process. Let's automate it. Let's have docs. Like, let's invest in it because we're investing in us, and ultimately it should save time. And that kind of pendulum there of like, let's do right by ourselves. I just try to stick to it.
Yeah, and I've been finding more and more as I go on that, like, for me, the right balance there, I've built habits around writing code that is like optimized for deletion, which is a phrase that I think I stole that from Chris Biscardi. But it's, if you're writing your code in a way that it's all small and portable, then all code is really potentially production ready. Because the only time that POCs really aren't like good to go out is if they are written as like sprawling spaghetti code. But if you write everything to be like small and modular, then like sure you got to refactor some pieces of it, or maybe you drop one and drop in something else. But ultimately, like you've got something that's good enough to go live, and so we've been building that habit. I spent a lot of time building that habit at IBM with a lot of the junior developers, thinking about. It's not functional programming, but it's concepts from functional programming. And by building those habits, we saw that our time to ship things went through the roof, like from 6 months to 6 weeks. And also our maintenance turnaround got significantly lower. Like we had some old kind of procedural code that we were responsible for maintaining. We inherited it from another team. If we needed to maintain that, we had to dedicate like a sprint to fixing the 2 or 3 issues in that procedural code.
Right.
With the code we had written, because it was functional. And like we had the advantage that we had written the code, but I might write code and somebody else might maintain it. And even in that case where it was a different person maintaining code, because it had been written with this idea of being like optimized for deletion, they could rip the whole module out because it was only probably 20, 30 lines of code anyways, and rewrite it to do the thing we needed. And they could do that in a day. As opposed to, whatever we would have had to do that procedural code. And it makes like testing is so much easier and all this stuff. So I don't know, we built some good habits that led to our proof of concepts typically would ship to production like 75% intact, which I thought was, I think that's kind of an unreasonably high number. But it felt pretty cool. Like it was good to know that you can build some habits that make you both fast and good.
For sure. Before we get to the end of this, I want to ask you, like, what tools do you find help you kind of do your day to day? What are some of your go-to keep Jason sane?
So I've been using Brain FM has been a good one for kind of music in the background. It's they say there's a lot of research behind it. I haven't checked any of the research. What I like about it is that it's unbroken instrumental music that just kind of helps me focus on whatever I'm doing. I use ZenHub is a huge one. What else? VS Code has been getting so much better recently that I feel like I need to give it a shout out. It's just such a fantastic editor.
It's losing some of the Microsofty. It feels more like a proper.
Man, it like code is good.
It is good.
I just picked up. I sprung for Operator Mono because I'm a hipster a hipster dev nerd. And then I downloaded Sarah Drasner's Night Owl theme. It's like I feel like it's stupid because you start thinking of your IDE as art, but like if you think about it, this is where you live
all day long.
Time, so it might as well look nice. But it's been so great.
I've been using Wes Boss's Cobalt theme for many months.
Yeah, no, that's another good one. Let's see, what else am I using that's great? Peril. So Danger.js, have you heard of it? So it's from, the guy's name is Okta on GitHub, but he wrote this library called Danger.js, which is basically a way in CI to parse the commits and issues and whatever. You can look at the messages and then you can send feedback right in the GitHub thread. So, if you've used ESLint or have you used like Code Climate or any of those like code quality analyses that like post feedback in GitHub? So Danger is like that, but it's significantly more flexible. So if I want to write something that says like, hey, you didn't add a body to your commit message or to your PR, you got to tell us what this thing does. Or if you made code changes, you can verify that the changelog was updated. If the changelog hasn't been modified, you can post a thing that says, hey, before you can merge a PR, you have to update the changelog. So just little things like that, that make a huge difference. And so, that is really cool. And then he has something called Peril that he developed as kind of a danger outside of CI. And so we put, Peril up on a hosted instance. And now we're using that as a way to kind of like send automatic invites to collaborators when they get their first PR merged and like do other kind of housekeeping stuff. It's not really related to continuous integration. That one's been huge. It's kind of a game changer. I got help from a guy named Steven Deutsch. I think that I hope I'm pronouncing his last name wrong.
Sounded very good.
But he helped me set up Peril on the Gatsby org, which was amazing. And so now we've got this incredible amount of just automation that's possible, which is great because, Gatsby has over 800 contributors and we've got hundreds of issues opening every week and our
a lot to hang on to.
Yeah, our contributor team is completely underwater and a lot of that is administrative work that we could theoretically automate. Yeah. So we're looking at ways to kind of automate some of that and we'll be open sourcing all that as we figure it out. So the goal is to build it in public and then write blogs about how it works. So that'll be fun. But I'd say those are like my biggest, the things I'm most excited about right now.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, at the end of this, at the end of every one of these, a couple of things happens. One, I extend a bit of gratitude, and with that, I'd be remiss if I did not say thank you to you. And we've been now rapping back and forth for probably a year. I've been a big fan of the work that you've done and the help that you've given me, the stuff that you're doing out in the open source in the wild. And with that, thank you for everything that you kind of stand for and do. I think it's pretty cool. Which leads me to my last question, which is a two-part question. One, how would you define community, and what does it mean to you?
Ooh, okay. So community to me is I'll give a really short anecdote to I guess illustrate how I feel about community. Community to me is when I first got started in public speaking, I went to an event called Future Insights. It was run by a team, but the woman who contacted me was named Lou Morgan. And she reached out to me because I was an author or something and was like, hey, can you speak? So I went there and I met a bunch of attendees. And among these attendees was a guy named Robin Cannon. And Robin and I only ever saw each other at Future Insights events. And I would show up to those events every year. So after 3 or 4 years, Future Insights went under. They dissolved all the conferences. And maybe 3 years after that, when I wrapped up my precision nutrition contract, which is the last big contract I took before I went full-time as an employee, I reached out to my network, and Robin, this guy that I'd only met at an event like 3 days a year for 4 years, he immediately went to bat for me and kind of put me at the very top of the IBM hiring queue, and got me pulled in and on his team. And I feel like that's what community is. It's this ability for these people, people like me who were living in Montana at the time, to show up at an event in Las Vegas for a couple days a year, meet basically complete strangers, and form deep enough bonds that somebody is willing to vouch for you into a company like IBM years later. That's a really incredible thing that like I'd never experienced before. And I feel like that's a really, and I guess that's also what it means to me, it's opened up these possibilities through, I like to build things and I like to put them on the internet and show people. And through that, I've had these doors open to be connected to people, people like you, people like Robin, people like, I've met all like people who build the internet, like the Apollo team, the React team. And I'm sitting down talking to these people who are having an enormous influence on the way the internet is going. And really the only reason I'm doing that is because I got on the internet and started sharing. Yeah. And I think that's what it is for me. It's a door. And it's just kind of boundless possibility as long as you're willing to put yourself out there and say hi.
I agree. I love it. Love it. All right. Well, sir, thank you for the time.
Absolutely.
This is a forced disconnect of thought sharing in the cloud. For everybody watching, thank you for your time. Give us a thumbs up, a likes. Drop some comments below on what's worked for you. Jason, where can people find you?
Probably the best place is Twitter. Twitter.com/Lengstorf, which is going to be fun for everyone to spell.
We'll drop it below.
Yeah, that's the easiest place. Or on GitHub, same username.
Cool. All right, sir. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to maybe something happening on Monday. But until then,
absolutely.
Peace out, brother.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. We'll talk soon.